All right, hey everyone. I'm Chris, and I lead our product and growth analytics teams here at Grafana Labs. So today we're going to be talking a bit about how we've been using Grafana dashboards internally within our data teams, and hopefully share some of what we learned as we begun to build more interactive and dynamic dashboards for business intelligence. So we'll start out here by going through a bit of an overview as to how and why we've seen interactive dashboards become such a big part of how we communicate data across Grafana Labs. We'll then jump in and probably spend the majority of our time going through a bit of a demo where we've got a couple dashboards to showcase how we would explore some of our community engagement data, as well as highlight some of the more dynamic elements we typically try to build into our dashboards. And then at the end, definitely want to open it up for a bit of Q&A. All right, so our journey at Grafana Labs really began about 3 to 4 years ago, where a handful of folks on our growth team were really the first to start making use of our business data on a more regular basis. And at the time, it was a bit of a process in that a lot of our data lived in a bunch of different production systems, and folks had to really make use of our CLI to pull that down into CSVs and work with it within Google Sheets. The next stage of our journey, we really began to build some more of the foundations for our data team today and really scale out what we were doing with our growth team. So we centralized a bunch of our data into BigQuery and really helped to lower the barriers to entry such that now if you could write some SQL and pull that against our BigQuery database, you can totally get access to a lot of those underlying metrics. And then fast forward to today, we're thankfully now at a point where we've got multiple teams across Grafana really starting to leverage this data on a more day-to-day basis and really incorporate it into our underlying workflows. And it's really been this last stage of our journey where we've seen interactive dashboards, and Grafana dashboards in particular, play a really critical role in helping us to translate a lot of that underlying data in BigQuery to our broader and potentially less technical audience, some of whom might be more interested in visually exploring our data or kind of using our dashboard UI. So as we jump over to our demo here today, I'm hoping to kind of highlight some of the more dynamic elements that we built in to really try to abstract away some of the underlying kind of custom SQL writing that we would normally have to do. All right, so this is the first dashboard that we have, and it's our community overview dashboard, where we're really trying to give a broader overall sense of how our community engagement has trended over time. And you can see the way we've approached this is provided some of our top-line KPIs up top, namely our number of page views, unique pages visited, unique visitors, and average page views per visitor. Down below, we have this kind of daily trend line of our total number of community page views with our moving average 7-day moving average laid on top to try to smooth out some of our kind of weekday, weekend variability. So the first thing we might want to do as a user is start to drill down on particular areas or time ranges here. And so we can start to, instead of looking at the last year, perhaps look at our last 90 days. You can kind of see I haven't updated the data here in a sec, but let's ignore that for a sec. Or you can see maybe some of the data over the last 6 months. Or perhaps we can start to drill down on this kind of holiday period where we saw a bit of a kind of natural seasonality happening here and see what that does to our KPIs. And so the way that we're able to do this is to take advantage of the fact that a lot of our underlying data here is being stored in a couple dashboard variables in our time range. And so whether or not we're changing it in our time picker up top, or if we're changing it in the time panel UI, we're able to pull that down into our underlying SQL through the use of this time filter macro. And essentially what this is doing is it's creating a dynamic statement in our where clause that's going to help us contain on whether or not our data fits within these two timestamps. I highly recommend going into the query inspector as a great way to kind of see how a lot of these dynamic features are interacting with our underlying SQL. In that we can see instead of that time filter now, we've got this where statement for our time period being between the first and last timestamp of the time range that we selected. Awesome. So the second thing that we often hear from our users is that this day over day kind of look at our data is helpful, but perhaps if we're going into a weekly stand-up or monthly all hands, we might want to look at things on a more month-over-month basis or a week-over-week basis. And the way that we're able to do that is by taking this kind of user-defined template dashboard variable and bring that again down into our underlying SQL here. And so you can see, just like before, we've got this date trunk statement where we're taking advantage of the fact that we've got this underlying dashboard variable we can bring in, which turns out to just be normal SQL. So we're date trunking our receive date to be based on our month or week or day, depending on whichever one our user chooses. Awesome. So the way that we're setting up this dashboard variable is that we're going into our dashboard settings, leveraging our variables. And you can see there are a number of variables that we've set up that are really driving the functionality of our dashboard. The first couple that we're using up top are custom variables, meaning that we can really define a static set of values that we want to present to our users. So if we wanted to add in quarter or year, you can see that we're doing this in this kind of comma-separated format here. Coming back to the top, we can now group our data by quarter or group our data by year. Granted, we don't have that much history, so there's not as much to present there. Awesome. So as a user, the first thing we might see in some of this data is that there has been a bit of a jump here in August. So the way that we would start to explore that is by really taking this data and cutting it into multiple different segments. And so we can look at things like whether or not our total page views are coming from our top 100 most popular pages or our kind of other pages. And similarly, we can look at whether or not our page views are coming from our newly created versus existing pages on our community site. And how we're doing this is we're essentially starting to toggle the same template variables, but we're doing it via a different panel here. So it's really decoupling the capabilities and allowing us to change the underlying variable through a different panel. What's happening is we actually have a hidden variable called monthly group by, which we'll unhide here. And coming to the panel that's being updated, you can see effectively on click, we're just updating this hidden variable. The way that we're doing that is actually taking advantage of the fact that we've got all of our dashboard variables or template variables encoded in our URL. So you can see we've got var-time period equals day up here. If we change this to week, you can see it's now var-time period equals week. If we really, really wanted to, we could totally type into our URL to update this to be month. Highly recommend not doing that on a regular basis, but that's essentially what's happening here just via this on-click method. And we're creating that through the use of data links. We're essentially a way for us to craft a unique URL based on the values that we have that we're clicking on in our UI. And so you can see we're creating a URL that's associated with our dashboard and passing in a new value for that monthly group by variable. Notably, there are a bunch of other variables in here because if you don't pass these through, Grafana will think by default you want to go back to the default values. And in this case, we want to persist everything that we've changed previously as our user. One tip here is that you can hit Control Space and see all the values that you can use to craft this URL. Highly recommend doing that. That's pretty much how I do this on a day-to-day basis. Awesome. So for the rest of this, we'll do more of a show and tell in that a lot of the underlying features and tools are just those three things. It's working with data links to create a custom URL that'll update our underlying dashboard variables, which will then be used in our SQL. So for the rest of this, we can start to explore our data, and we're starting to see that if we look at our newly created page views, there is something that's happening here in our July to August timeframe. And if we are able to zoom in on that time frame here and start to filter down our table to just the newly created pages, we can use this last section, which is really intended to highlight individual page contributions, and start to preview some of the individual pages that we're seeing. And so we can start to notice that each of the K6 pages are actually all starting from the same date. And if we actually link out to the K6 pages themselves, we'll note that these were actually created quite a while ago, although in our data they look like they're coming through as being newly created on July 26, 2023. So what happened here in the back end after doing a bunch of searching in Slack is actually we migrated our K6 blogs to be combined with our broader Grafana Labs community forums, and so that's why these posts are all starting to be seen on this day, even though they were historically very active. The last thing I'll share is that in addition to being able to link out to additional kind of outside sort systems, we can also link to additional dashboards that give us this ability to have a high-level overview dashboard with kind of the broad sense of what's going on in the business, and then drill down to a point where we want to get to a more detailed dashboard. And I just thought this was pretty cool, so I threw it in here. We essentially looked at our top 100 most common pages in our community, put that through OpenAI's embedding model, and got the vectors back, compressed them down into 3 dimensions to create this 3-dimensional picture of our community pages. And by highlighting the selected page and looking at some of the most common next pages and previous pages that our users were clicking on, we can kind of get a sense if folks are exploring the same area of our community or if they're hopping around and going to different, maybe adjacent topics. Notably, we actually can also use data links on some of these dots if they have info. So you can totally, you can use anything outside of, or many of our panels provide the ability to use data links to jump around. Maybe the last thing I'll point out here, if we got it a bit, is that we also, it's really interesting how much kind of the cumulative impact of some of our kind of interactions can be, in that we are actually down here showing some of our next pages and previous pages. And just by allowing users to click on the most common next pages that we see in our data, we get something similar to a user kind of journey mapping tool, even though it's not perfect because we're not following a single user. But it pretty quickly gives us a way to identify and understand a bit of how our users are interacting with our underlying systems. Awesome. So that was a bit of the demo. I realized we went through that very quickly. We might have a lot of time for Q&A. I'm wondering if I skipped anything. I don't think so. Yeah, let's go to Q&A, and then we can totally talk about other stuff if we want to do that.
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Okay, so any questions for Chris? I'm not good at spotting. Front row, here we go.
Yeah, hello, my name is Eric. I'm from ING Netherlands. I have a question. If you look at those time series data, where you look at month value visitors, how easy would it be to compare the amount of visitors from 1 month versus last year and find outliers there?
Yes, that's a great question. We don't have the data. We don't have our. Okay, that's fine. It is actually a new setting that we have in. Okay, cool. Sweet. There's actually a really cool setting in our table, our stat panel up top, which you can now come in and show the percentage change that's happened. And so essentially, you need to ensure that your data goes back for the start timestamp that you want to look at. So in this case, if you wanted to do year over year, you'd have your first date be the time last year, and then have your last day be the time this year, and it'll automatically calculate for you the change year over year as a way to show the delta.
Okay, on every special, the reason why I ask is if you have K6 metrics that is doing a test over a certain period of time, and you want to compare it to previous tests, you want to find the outliers. And I was wondering if this could be a way to do that.
Got it. Yeah, and are you saying, do you have that data in, say, like a SQL backend, or like part of this is that it's helpful, at least in my world, to be able to do a lot of the transformation and calculation in our underlying SQL and in some of our transformations. And so we can totally do additional transformations and do calculation if you can pull in the specific columns that you, or actually I did it here at the bottom. If you can pull in the specific columns that you want to do the calculation on, you can add a new column that is actually just kind of the row-wise calculation of, in this case, community page views divided by unique visitors. So if you had both columns, you can totally do that.
Cool. Thanks.
Sweet.
Thank you. Good question. Any other questions for Chris? Going once? Yes. Oh, yes. Alyssa's got it. Last time when we went for the same person, Alyssa just went like that to me. Like, stop!
Hi, this is Sander from the Netherlands. I'm curious if you're in your team also do anything with alerting on these visuals and showing them in Grafana.
Yeah, great question. We are starting to get into that quite a bit now, particularly as we're trying to alert many of our internal success and support teams as we potentially start to see individual users see spikes in some of their usage or billing. We not only want to use alerting to try to send out automated emails to our users to say, hey, you might want to check out whichever kind of billing metric might be spiking, but we also want to highlight and identify in Slack or in Zendesk for our support teams to know and also try to help out and reach out to our users. So yeah, it's interesting. There are definitely a lot of parallels that we're trying to draw from kind of the observability space and apply that to kind of this business observability type of approach.
Nice. Thank you.
Yeah, another good question. Oh, and I can get there before Alyssa.
Hi, I'm Jacob. I was wondering, the panels that you show at the dashboards, the questions that you formulate, are they mostly driven by you who owns the data or the people who consume your dashboards?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I did create those as I was kind of thinking through the structure of the dashboard, but we were actually just having a conversation with some of our PMs to see if we could have this be more, I guess, maybe source-driven or community-driven, in that we'd love to have just a list of questions to help go and answer. Maybe a creative way of doing this. So you can see how we've done this is essentially just using the text panel, and we've done some kind of hacky HTML here to make it work. But it could be really cool to link this up to maybe a Google Sheet data source and have folks start to insert questions and have that populate that we can kind of draw from and pull out. So yeah, we don't do that just yet, but that's definitely on the list of things we'd love to do.
Thank you. Any other questions for Chris? Yes.
I'm Chico from My Decisive AI. My question is, it looks like this demo uses a lot of non-telemetry data to show a business intelligence use case, which is cool. Do you have any examples of trying to merge non-telemetry data with telemetry data?
Yes. Yeah, we've definitely tried to do that a bit in the past. It's historically been a little bit difficult in that some of the merge transforms didn't always work as we thought they were going to. I believe in Grafana 11, we're fixing a lot of that. And there's, I think we're officially possibly going to support a ability to use some SQL-like syntax to do joins across different data frames. Relatively sure that made it in.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you. All right, any more questions for Chris? There's a slight delay when I'm back here, and it's quite strange. It's like my voice is disconnected from my, I don't know, face. Is it? Is that where your voice is?
Maybe just one last thing I'd love to show, since we've got a couple seconds.
Yeah.
Is the 3D plot. Huge shout out to, I think it was A3E3 who created this community panel. So this is actually
Is that someone from Star Wars?
I thought so too.
Yeah.
This is actually essentially a Plotly panel, which is using a bunch of JavaScript to create this based on the data that's coming in to our data frame. And so, for what it's worth, I also learned JavaScript for this in particular, so this might not be great JavaScript. But yeah, it's just really cool that there's so many different plugins we can check out.
Yeah, that is very cool. I don't think any JavaScript is right. JavaScript, is it? I'm not having a go. I love JavaScript, but like when you've got a function that you're meant to pass a string in, and instead you can just pass the whole window. Do you know what I mean? We've got to ask some questions. Okay, any other final questions for Chris? Scanning. Going once. Going twice. Don't move. Okay, well, give it up for Chris, everybody.